Hello and welcome to the third tutorial about keeping leafcutter ants. Today I'm going to talk about the fungus and how to keep the fungus alive, which is a very big part of keeping leafcutters because it's the most challenging part and also the part that a lot of people are afraid of, or if people fail with keeping leafcutter ants, usually that's the reason why, because they didn't manage to keep the fungus alive. So let's go directly down here into the fungus chamber, because that's what we're going to talk about today. That's the fungus, as you can see here. And keeping the fungus alive is very important, because the colony cannot survive without the fungus. They need it to feed the brood, to feed the queen. It's the essential part that the whole colony evolves around. So keeping leafcutter ants basically means you have to find a way to keep that fungus healthy and growing and in best shape. And there are a couple of things that you have to consider if you want to do so. First, a couple of general facts about the fungus. What you need to know, first of all, the fungus should never be in contact with direct sunlight, because that harms the fungus, and it should never come in direct contact with water, because water harms the fungus as well. So try to make sure that never happens. And a couple of general facts as well about the colors of the fungus. As you can see, the fungus has different kind of colors. There are three kind of colors. There's this gray area, this dark area on the top, almost blackish, gray, dark gray. That's new fungus. That's how fungus looks if it's new. It's because the leaves, the dark part you see are actually the leaf parts. They are dark. If they are processed, they get almost black. And the white fungus will start slowly growing above it, but at the beginning it's quite dark. Then there's the middle part, that's the white fungus. That part is still healthy, still growing fungus. The fungus has grown over the leaves, and that's why it turns white. And then there's the bottom part. There's not too much at the moment, because they have cleaned up quite a lot of it. But usually at the bottom you can see parts that are yellow, or even brownish. That's the dead part of the fungus, and that's the fungus that already died. And it's normally to have all three colors in your chamber. Usually always on the top it's the dark part and the white part, and then the yellow part. You cannot see, there's not much yellow at the moment here, which is very good, but I will show you some photos. Anyway, that's normal. You will have yellow parts of the fungus. You will have dead parts of the fungus. That's normal. You don't have to worry about it. That's the usual cycle, the usual way it works. They build new fungus. The fungus grows. They harvest what they can from the fungus, and eventually the fungus will die. And it's always from top to bottom. So they always build new fungus on the top and carry away the old dying fungus on the bottom. So the fungus on the bottom is always the oldest part. That's also why the fungus tends to trip over quite a lot, because they're playing a game of Jenga, basically, building new material on the top and carrying around away old material on the bottom. And especially if the fungus doesn't fill the whole container like it does here, the fungus will tip over eventually, now and again. So don't worry about that. That's just normal. Anyway, that's the basic facts about keeping the fungus. Now, there are two things that you really have to think or consider about when you want to keep the fungus alive, and that's what I want to talk about today, or more in depth. First is temperature, and the second is humidity. Now, let's start with temperature. I will use degrees Celsius when I'm talking here, because that's what I'm used to living in Europe, but I will always make some captations in the video what it is in Fahrenheit for all the people from America, so you will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the temperatures you want to keep your fungus should be between 20 degrees Celsius and 26 degrees Celsius at all time. That's the temperature range that you want to have the fungus in, ideally around 24 and 25 degrees Celsius. But it doesn't really matter if it's, as long as it's within that range. So between 24 and 25 degrees Celsius, that's the time when the fungus grows the most. If you're below 20 degrees Celsius, you don't have to worry too much about it if it's for a short period of time, because it will not harm your fungus. The fungus will just stop growing. And of course you have to get it back up above 20 degrees Celsius again, because you need a growing fungus. The fungus needs to be growing because there's always old fungus dying, and if there's no new fungus growing, then you eventually have a problem, but that's a long-term problem. So if it's just for short periods of time below 20 degrees Celsius, no problem, as long as it gets up again. In nature this happens quite often in the night time, that temperatures can drop below 20 degrees Celsius, and it's no problem for the fungus. Higher temperatures are a little bit more of a problem. You should really try to keep temperatures below 26 degrees or below 27 degrees Celsius. 26 degrees Celsius is still okay, but 27 is already troublesome, especially for longer periods of time. Now, if it's for 1 hour or 2 hours, usually the fungus it's not damaged, but if it's longer, for a couple of hours or even days, you will get a problem, because this can really harm your fungus. You need to try to keep your temperatures below 26 or 27 degrees Celsius, because higher temperatures can really harm the fungus, and it can kill your fungus quite quickly. So you should really try to do that. The way I do it, what I usually use in summer when it's getting really hot is this kind of water cooler. This is a very simple system. You just fill in water here. See it here? That's where you fill in water, and then you have it running. That's a very simple system, and especially if it's if you have a closed place like this, where the nest is in, that usually is sufficient. The thing is that if water evaporates, it cools the surrounding area, and that's actually what this is based on. So it's not very complicated. It's a very simple system. You just have to fill it with water now and again. It just a ventilator and water evaporating, and that is usually enough to lower temperatures inside here for a couple of degrees Celsius, which is enough. But this doesn't work too well in places where there's high humidity. It works really well in drier areas or mid-range. With mid-range humidity, then it can really cool down. So those can be a real help. I just use it. The only downside of this thing is that if I fill the tank with water, it usually lasts between 4 and 6 hours, and then it runs out of water. And so that might be a little bit of a problem if you're going away for a longer time, for a couple of days or something like that. Then I always have to turn on the aircon, and I don't really like running aircon too much because it uses so much power. But if I'm away for a couple of days, then I have to run an aircon just to keep it below 27 degrees Celsius. So make sure the temperatures are never above 27 degrees Celsius. But don't panic if it happens for a couple of hours or happens once or something like that. Usually the fungus should not be damaged too much, maybe a little part of it or something like that. I think everything, I forgot to say that at the beginning, everything about the fungus, don't panic too much. I think a calm ant keeper is the best ant keeper. And if you panic at the slightest problem or the slightest hint of a problem, then that doesn't really help your fungus or your ants. So try to remain calm. And if it happens once or something like that, usually it shouldn't be too much of a problem. If it just happens over a longer period of time, that will be a problem. So make sure that it doesn't happen for a couple of days or something like that. But what you should always be wary of, never go above 30 degrees Celsius. If it happens for a couple of hours that it goes above 27 degrees Celsius, okay, no problem. But if it goes above 30 degrees Celsius, you might have a real problem, because temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius can not only harm your fungus, but it can also harm your queen. I heard from a lot of ant keepers that experienced that their queen died if the temperatures went above 30 degrees Celsius. And there are also some people who say that even if she doesn't die, she might get infertile if you go above 30 degrees Celsius. So keep that in mind. Anyway, now about the second big thing, that's humidity. Yeah, when you read about it, when you try to do your research, what you usually hear people saying is that you should try to keep humidity at levels between 80% and 90% inside the fungus chamber. And I've seen that number of times, but in my opinion, if you have it at 80%, that's too low. That doesn't really work. In my opinion, if you're at 80%, your fungus will probably shrink or even die. Try to get it as high as possible. That's my personal opinion. Try to get humidity as high as possible. I don't really know why it should be below 90%. I always try to have it above 90%. I just made the best experience. The fungus was growing the fastest if the humidity level was the highest, and even if I had multiple fungus chambers, they always chose the one chamber with the highest humidity levels to put their fungus in. So I believe the higher the humidity level, the better. And the only downside of humidity levels above 90%, in my opinion, is that you have water condensating on your container, which is not that bad. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But for now, my personal opinion, just try to keep it as high as possible. And another thing that I want to talk about is I really recommend that you don't trust a hygrometer too much, because I had a couple of hygrometers in there and I tried different hygrometers, and my experience is that that usually, in the mid-range, when the humidity is in the mid-range, like between 30 and 70%, then the different hygrometers usually always show more or less the same percentage. But as soon as you're in the high range, above 80%, I've experienced that different hygrometers have vastly different results. At one time I had two hygrometers in there, and one showed 99% and the other showed 81%. That's a huge difference. And it's really hard to say which one to trust, especially I think the electronic hygrometers show very high numbers, whereas the mechanical hygrometers show very low numbers. And I think that's something to do that there might be water condensating inside the electronic ones, which leads to higher numbers than there actually are. So don't trust the hygrometer too much. Just try to keep humidity as high as possible, as you can achieve. And you need, that's very important, you need some sort of medium that can store humidity. In my setup it's plaster. You cannot really see it well, but on the ground here, the ground is like 1 centimeter, a little bit over 1 centimeter. It's plaster, and plaster can store moisture, so that you need some medium in there, either dirt or something that can store humidity, store moisture, so you can keep the humidity the humidity high. In an empty container or an empty terrarium or anything, it's really difficult to keep humidity levels high. And one thing to remember is, especially if your colony is still small and the fungus is still small, you need a way to put water into the system. And the fungus may never come in direct contact with the water, but you still need to find a way to put water into the system. I have in my setup, you can check it in my setup video as well. I have this system here that this little tube leads directly into the plaster at the bottom, so I can add water in here without and the water goes directly into the plaster and doesn't touch the fungus itself. So it's really good to have some way to put water into the system to keep humidity levels high, without opening the whole system. If you have to open the cover of the whole thing to put water in, that might not be very helpful, because every time you open the cover, the whole humidity levels and everything, the microclimate inside here that the ants worked so hard to keep intact is evaporating, is going out. And of course, if you put water in, the the humidity levels will rise again eventually, but in the meantime, your fungus might already take damage. So if you find a way, especially if you start, try to have a way right from the beginning on. Think about the way how you get water inside the system, that you can keep humidity levels high enough without having to without the fungus coming in direct contact with water. You know, before I had this whole system, I used let me show you. I used those kind of water. I don't know how to call it. I went in from the outside, went through the pipe and put in water into the plaster, and that was just really annoying. So I'm really happy that I have a system now that I can add water. As soon as the fungus is a certain size, you know, as it reaches a certain size, and with size I mean a percentage that it fills the container, like with 60-70%, usually you don't have to worry too much about humidity anymore, because like here, I hardly ever have to add water because they're carrying in leaves all the time, and those leaves have a high content of water, and that usually keeps humidity high. The only time I have to think about adding water now and again is in winter, because in winter the humidity in the air is much lower, and so the humidity inside the container is lost quicker, and also the leaves contain less water, because the leaves I can find in winter outside that are still green usually have lower levels of water in there. But especially in spring and summer, usually the leaves they carry in is enough to keep humidity levels really high, and that should, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But still, you should have the possibility to add water and check it regularly if you think the humidity levels are high enough. Now, how do you know if your humidity level is high enough if you don't trust the hygrometer? Now, my personal experience is that I only trust the condensating water. So what I want to see in my system always is some water condensation on the walls, and I'm not sure if you can see it here, but the walls here it's a little bit grayish, and that's because there are a lot of small droplets of water on the glass here, and that's actually water condensating. And for me, that's always a good sign. Of course, it doesn't look that good. It's not that. It looks a little bit dirty. It might look a little bit dirty, and you don't have the same view as if there would be no water condensating. But for me, that's a good sign. I'm not too worried about it, because I know humidity levels are high, because otherwise there wouldn't be water condensating on the walls. Now, people are very often, when I read in forums, people are very scared of condensating water, because they, you know, you can see here at the top there are droplets here, quite big droplets actually, and they often have those drops of water on the top, and they are really scared that it might fall down to the fungus and destroy the fungus. And the only thing I can say about it is don't worry about it. Even if a drop falls down on the fungus, it might destroy a little part of fungus, maybe a square centimeter or maybe two. Not much to worry about, because depending on the colony size, they can rebuild that amount of fungus within minutes or hours, no problem. But if the humidity levels are too low, it can kill your fungus within a day or something like that. So I rather risk having a drop of water falling into my fungus now and again than having humidity levels too low. Also, the ants usually they work on making sure that those drops don't fall down. They put things in it they take substrate, put things into the drops, and or they just drink the drops. They work as well, so the fungus doesn't get in direct contact with water. So my opinion or my advice is don't worry about water condensating inside your container. Just make sure that humidity levels are as high as you can possibly get them to be. That's also why I think it's very important that you have your container closed, but it still needs some sort of airflow. Now, if you completely close and have very long tubes leading to it, and that's usually, that can be another problem, that the air is not good enough for the fungus anymore. So make sure that you have some sort of airflow. Like for example here, there's air coming in here and going there, and You know, here it's open as well. I think that's something good, because then you have some airflow. You don't have you have oxygen in there. You need oxygen in the fungus chamber. If you, for example, if you have a closed container, then you have very long tubes on both sides, and it takes quite a distance before you have an opening or something like that. You might have not enough airflow in there, and that might harm your fungus as well. So make sure that you keep your humidity levels high, but also allow a certain amount of airflow. If there's too much airflow, it's almost impossible to keep humidity levels high enough. If there's too little airflow, you might have a problem with oxygen in there. So make sure you when you make your setup, already think about that and keep your humidity levels high. Anyway, that's I think the most important things about keeping your fungus alive. If you have questions, further questions, or things that you want to add, just write a comment. I try to answer all questions as good as possible. The next video, I will make another video soon. Next tutorial will be about population control, because that's actually one of the most requested videos about leafcutter ants, because especially about atta ants, because a lot of people are really worried about having a colony that's out of control, that grows into the millions. And first thing said, I can already tell you, hey, don't let that keep you from getting atta. Of course, atta can have larger colonies. An atta colony will always be larger than, like for example, a Campanotus colony or something like that. You will always have, sooner or later, you will always have a couple of 10,000 ants. But the thing that if you do it right, it won't get into the millions. You know, what people are always saying about atta is that sooner or later you will have a colony that explodes and you cannot control it anymore, and you will have so many ants, and no matter how large your system is, it will never be large enough. And that's just not true. There are very good ways to control the population, keep it at an acceptable level. This colony is like 2 years old now, and it has a couple of 10,000 of ants, and it has remained at that size for quite a while now. There are some ways to control the population without having to kill ants or destroy fungus, because that's things that I personally believe are never wise to do, because it usually messes up the system and might not lead to the results you want to. But there are very good ways of population control, natural ways of population control that don't harm your ants, and still you can still manage to keep your colony in a size that is manageable even for a private person. That's the next video that will be coming up. I might have to do another video first that I explain a couple of things about the harvesting, about how leafcutter ants do their harvesting, because that might be some background knowledge that you're going to need in order to understand the population control thing. But this is what's coming up, so if you want to see those videos and don't miss it, please subscribe and hit the bell icon too. And again, if you have questions or requests, just write a comment. Thank you very much.